You're listening to episode 65, Holly's Story, a son with Hereditary Spastic Paraparesis, HSP. Hi, and welcome to the Child Life On Call podcast. When your child is sick, the whole world seems to stop in its tracks. Plans and priorities change, and your number one job becomes figuring out how to get your child well again. For some of us, rest, medications, and relaxation can do the trick. But for others, it takes more. It takes countless doctor appointments, invasive medical testing, therapy, surgeries, the list goes on, and then you still may not have all of the answers or results you were hoping for. This podcast features parents of children that have an illness or medical condition and gives them a place to share their own journeys and experiences. We will talk about the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, but one thing seems to remain the same. Children are resilient and teach us more about ourselves and the world than we could ever imagine. Thank you so much for lending a listening ear and opening up your heart to these families and this podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor.
Want to go down this road again with cognitive. I've already dealt with the physical part of things, but if I have to, I have to. I know I'm strong enough to do that now.
Hello, my friends. I'm so happy you're here today, and I cannot wait for you to meet Holly. She is freaking hilarious. And honestly, her sense of humor just makes you feel instantly connected to her. And I just love how she tells stories about her family and gives such honest perspective with kind of a humor twist, which I am obviously a fan of. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know I love to be silly and joke around, and I'm incredibly sarcastic. So Holly, right up my alley. Love it. So we're going to be talking about her son, Austin, who has HSP. And then it's a pretty interesting story. He was, whatever you want to call it, he was born with this. This is a genetic condition. And he was actually typical until just after his first birthday, when he started to regress. My favorite part of our conversation is when Holly talks about how much she hates playgrounds, which just kind of as a mom I can relate to. And then she takes it to this whole extra level of just the drama of the playground, the equipment, the actual ground that you're walking on, the people there, and how she's taken that passion for how much she dislikes playgrounds and actually turned it into part of their foundation work called Walk with Austin. So enough about me talking right now. Let's get to Holly.
We are in Northern California in the Sacramento area. We've been here almost 4 years. My family is my husband, Adam, myself. I have 2 boys from a previous marriage. Riley's 14 and Roman's 12, and their dad lives in our same town, which is great in terms of sharing and co-parenting. And then Austin is 5 and Avery's 3. I'm originally from Texas, and I moved out to California after college because I got married super young out of Christian college, and that's where he was from. So we moved out here and then didn't work and then had to stay because of sharing kids. Right. And then I met my husband, Adam, at the sheriff's office. He was a deputy, and I was doing youth programs like mentoring programs and DARE and all that kind of thing. Oh, and cool. So we worked together, and it was kind of nice to see someone as a friend with no interest at all and like get to know them that way, and then develop into more, which was great. And
totally.
He retired out a few years ago with a back injury, and it's been a huge blessing, I think. Law enforcement's really hard on any person and any family, especially right now. Mm-hmm. And it sucks to have a bad back, of course, but his quality of life is a lot better now. And he transitioned into like sales, and I started staying home a few years ago to be a momager. And we moved to the Sacramento area because it's a little slower pace than the Bay. and more affordable, more suburban, that kind of thing. So we really love it here.
So let's talk about, sweet Austin. I obviously just love his name. He's who we'll be focusing on today. So I guess talk a little bit about the beginning of your journey and if you can take yourself kind of back to what happened.
Sure. Um, so Austin had a totally typical pregnancy, totally typical birth. Everything was meeting milestones and everything until 12 months. And at 12 months, he started walking, like toddling like a little, drunken sailor, and adorable, just the apple of our eye, because I had two older boys who just, thought he was the best thing.
Yeah.
And he still is. But after 12 months, he got his MMR and had some kind of reaction to it, like hives. And I didn't really think much of it because that's one of the possible reactions to it. But also, he got an ear infection like a week after. And so he tried penicillin for the first time, or amoxicillin. And so we didn't know if it was the vaccine or the penicillin that became an allergy. Anyway, all that to say, it was like pretty typical. My older boys always had mystery rashes, no big deal, whatever. But after that, he regressed, and it wasn't overnight. So I don't know if it was a vaccine injury. I don't even have a strong enough opinion about that to go there. But I will say that the timing sucks because then it makes you question.
Sure.
But he started to regress. So he started cruising along furniture again and crawling, and he would not let go of our hands when we were having him walk. So I don't know, we just thought it was a phase for maybe a month or so, and then we emailed our pediatrician, and she said we don't really worry about this until 18 months, blah blah blah. So we went in at 15 months for maybe like a normal thing or an ear infection, and she was like, oh no, his gait does look interesting, we need to see a neurologist. So we were like, okay. In the meantime, because he'd had several ear infections, we got tubes in thinking maybe that was affecting his balance. And he was also not just the walking issue. If he was sitting and laughed too hard, he would fall right over, like no balance at all. And it's so hard to tell because at that age, they're falling over anyway and bumping their head on every single thing. But she noticed too. And so we went to a neurologist. We were in the Bay Area at that time, so I don't remember which hospital system it was with, but we started there, and then we went to Stanford, and felt really good being at like a premier university, children's hospital, and that we'd surely get some answers. But I think that was the most disheartening thing at the time was I just never had a reason to question anything medical. Like I never had a medical mystery in my life before that. So to encounter all these doctors and specialists that were like, I'm not sure. It's like, oh, crap.
Yeah.
So I became a Google doctorate, which did not help anyone, but every single night Googling until wee hours trying to figure out what it was. And then in the meantime, we started physical therapy. We still didn't have any answers. We were starting the testing process, but they said, go ahead and start physical therapy. So we did. And every single session I would say, what about this? What about that? Usually with tears in my eyes, and the physical therapist just said, let me worry about this. Don't worry about it. You do all the normal mom things, go home, play. That's all they need for physical therapy anyway. It's just play. So don't worry about it. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. But she was really sweet to say that, and I was really happy to feel like I had an advocate in her.
Okay.
So
yeah, I was wondering, how did you receive that? Did you kind of like that stance she took?
With her, yes. With a different physical therapist at that same location, when we had like our intake assessment, we had someone who he was like 16 months old maybe, so tiny.
Yeah.
And we go in and we're hoping for not a big deal, of course. And she's like, you know what? I think this is a parent's worst nightmare, CP.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, first of all, who says that? And second, now that I know what CP is, I'm like, that is not a parent's worst nightmare. Are you kidding me? So
Are you kidding?
we definitely had words with her, supervisor and we're just like, I think she probably means the best and she may be great at her job, but please don't ever say these words to any parent
Yeah.
ever again.
Wow.
So that was probably, you know, well, actually, I don't even remember how many times I cried during that whole process because it was all the time. But um, in the testing process, it was a lot of like, hold your breath, cry, find out, you know, whatever happened next. So we had an MRI and it was clear, spinal tap, clear, all the blood and urine tests, clear. The urine test was hilarious because I have to tape a bag to a little baby area.
Yeah.
And then all these things you learn, you're like, wow, that's fun to do that.
Yeah.
But nothing happened. And so eventually genetic testing, and, you know, we found some random things that my husband and I are both carriers of and Googled that to death, but nothing
Right.
associated with his symptoms. So, and then we moved, I think, somewhere during that year and kind of started over with doctors. We only moved 2 hours away, so we could have stuck with them, but since they weren't giving us any answers anyway, we were like,
Right.
oh, yeah, fresh eyes. So we went to a new neurologist here in the Sacramento area who, within 5 minutes of meeting Austin, who was like 2.5 at this point, was like, oh, I think it's HSP. And we're like, what is HSP? Please tell us. He said, it's hereditary spastic paraparesis, and I've had, you know, a handful of these kids in my, you know, tenure of practice, whatever. Some of them just have a limp, and some of them are in a wheelchair. So it's very different for each kid, blah, blah, blah. And my husband was like, what do you know? Like, because it was only 5 minutes of meeting this new neurologist. And on one hand, yay for hearing an answer of some sort. And on the other, like, just now tell us why we should trust you again.
Right.
So that was the beginning of having a name for it. Also, the word hereditary didn't really stick because we don't have any family history on either side. But we learned later that 50%, I think, of HSP cases are hereditary and the other 50% are de novo. So
Okay.
then we went, we researched, and I called a specialist in Michigan and sent him over some video, and he said, yes, it does seem to fit the criteria. Let me send you to a colleague in Dallas. So we went to Dallas to Scottish Rite, and there was a hereditary or a HSP specialist there, and he was really good. As he would say, I'm not a specialist because I know any more than other people. I just have all these kids, like on my caseload, so I see a lot of them. But we went to that, and that was awesome because it coincided with a pediatric HSP conference, so we got to meet other families with the same diagnosis, and that was really neat. It was, okay, I was new to the special needs mom world, so I don't have the best tact. On the shuttle from the airport, there was a young girl in a wheelchair and her mom, and I was like, are you here for the HSP conference? She was like, yes, we are. I was like, thank God, because that would have been really embarrassing if not. But I was super excited to meet someone in our same, like, walk of life.
Yeah,
So
because at that
got
time,
a confirmation.
yeah, go ahead.
We just kind of, we had that appointment, and then at that conference, we kind of got a confirmation. And I say kind of, and I'll talk more about that, but it's still just a clinical diagnosis. It's not genetic. We've not identified the gene yet. And so we're like 95% certain this is what it is, and we don't have any other good leads, but I'm still holding out for like that genetic confirmation.
Right.
But yeah, at that clinic, that's basically what they said as well, clinical diagnosis.
When you met other families, were they kind of in the same boat in that they have this clinical diagnosis and awaiting the genetic response?
There was a major, you know, spectrum of what people knew or had, and the thing with HSP too is that, and since being diagnosed with HSP, we now call it spastic paraplegia when we're explaining it to people, because the hereditary thing just brings a different part of the conversation that we don't even need to have because nobody else has it.
Totally.
And then paraparesis, I'm definitely not a doctor, so don't quote me, but it's, you know, like the limited use of, and whereas paraplegia Austin really doesn't have any use of his legs in terms of weight bearing and stuff now. So we just say spastic paraplegia to be like succinct about it. But
Mm.
everyone there, they were, Austin was in the youngest range at that time, like 2.5, 3, all the way up to teenagers. And some people had crutches, like walking crutches, and then some people were in chairs. Everyone was different. And then there's pure HSP, which only affects neuromuscular waist down. Or there's complicated HSP, which is common with any kind of neurological difference in that there's multiple. So someone might also have epilepsy or also have, I don't know what else there is, all the things. So it's
Sure.
kind of hard to tease out sometimes. We thought that Austin had pure in that he was only affected from the waist down with his muscles having low tone, but also spasticity and being really rigid. But now he's 5, almost 6, and his speech is still pretty delayed, and his fine motor, like he gets occupational therapy for fine motor as well. So just recently, we saw a new geneticist at Shriners who suggested we get some fresh eyes again because it's probably HSP plus something else. So that's where we're at right
Okay.
now.
I love how you decide to call it something that makes sense to you and fits with him. And the
Yeah,
reason I love that is because, I mean, the doctors got to make up all these words. Like, why
yeah,
can't parents call it what they want, what
totally.
makes sense to them? And I love that. And I think anyone listening should just call whatever their child has, whatever diagnosis, whatever feels best to them. I mean,
I
truthfully, it's
agree.
nobody's business what the actual, you know,
Yeah,
medical dictionary version is. You call it
yeah,
what you want to call it. And I love that.
yeah. I mean, they first of all, they barely know. They just kind of
Right.
guessed. Just kidding. It is an educated guess. But also, it's super rare, so it's not like anyone's going to correct me.
Right.
um,
Totally.
and it makes sense, like you said. It just makes sense, and it kind of tells people what they need to know. If it's like an acquaintance thing where you're just going to give
Right.
like the elevator speech version,
Yeah.
then if it's like a school aid or something, of course I'll go into more detail. But and a lot of times I say it's very similar to CP because people just understand CP better,
Sure.
including our current physical therapy. Like people, they, I think our current therapist has never had anyone with spastic paraplegia. So I just,
Okay.
he treats him just like he has CP.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is, we can say till you're blue in the face, don't Google, you're going to find worst case scenarios, but
You're right.
that's just not going to happen. Like we're going to
Yeah.
Google ourselves. So I guess, are there any like tips or like tricks that you found in your Googling, or like when to put your phone down, when to pick it up,
Yeah.
like any insight on that?
That is a good question. I'm an over Googler in general, um, kind of a super sleuth. So I love to just find something that I feel like nobody else found, which is kind of ridiculous in terms of the medical world because definitely not trained or my job. But um, I think in the unknown years before we had any type of diagnoses, I was grasping at straws big time. And so a lot of that was probably pretty futile, but I wanted to have answers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in retrospect, it was not very helpful. I wish that maybe I had spent that time. Well, you can't know what you don't
Right.
know. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say I wish I wouldn't, but what I still do it. I still Google the what ifs. Um, if I meet a kid who has something that I've never heard of, I'll Google it and I'll be like, oh, that's kind of similar to Austin. But
Right.
at the end of the day, it doesn't change anything that's available to us right now in terms of medical interventions, research, therapy. He's never qualified for any type of like research, clinical trials, anything like that because we don't know exactly genetically what he has. So in terms of like protocols, it doesn't change anything. So I guess
Right.
when I talk to other special needs parents, that's something that I talk about. Well, what would it change if you knew this or that? Maybe nothing. So just
Mm.
go with what you know and kind of like dive deep into those things like the therapies or
Oh, I like that
Yeah.
question. What does finding this out change actually for us?
Mhm. Mhm.
I really like
For a
that.
while, because I had another child after Austin, for a while I was really curious about saving her stem cells and
Mm.
banking her cord blood and all this stuff. And I
Mm-hmm.
talked to a geneticist who said, yes, do that if you want to, but you should know that there's like the same percent chance of that being a match as just going to the donor bank and like finding a match.
Okay.
So don't stress out too much. And I was like, oh, well, that's great
Yeah.
information.
Totally.
So
I
yeah.
think one of the good things I do like about the Google
Mhm.
is you're equipping yourself with some questions that other people are
Mhm.
asking. So it's
Yep.
good to take the questions that you ask Google and then also ask your doctor or ask, one of the medical experts that you're in front of. So and then, you
Totally
have
true.
two sides of the situation. So ask ask a friend and then ask your doctor too.
Yeah, totally. And especially when you have, well, I don't know, especially, it's only the situation that I know. So he has a rare disease or um, rare condition, whatever you want to call it. That's still something I don't know how I want to phrase it. Disease, condition,
Yeah.
I don't know. But because it's so rare, his doctors now, they don't all, they're not all experts in it. So like our regular pediatrician who we go to for like a cold or a virus, he's
Right.
like, you tell me, I don't know. So
Yeah.
that's an instance where I need to know all my stuff.
Uh-huh.
Whereas his specialist, it's more like, well, what about this? What about that? And then, yeah, the parents totally. I had no idea. Not that I feel like solely responsible, but kind of like
Yeah.
I'm the only one that's like fully in charge of this whole chart situation and medical
Right.
history and everything. So, yeah, that was another job that I
So
took.
it's the momager side that you were talking about. Um,
Totally. Yes.
and tell me about what is your method for keeping track of his chart, of his appointments?
Oh,
How do
Lord.
you
I'm the
juggle
worst.
it?
I'm the worst, literally, like
No
the
way.
worst. Google keeps me in check with my Google calendars and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I have like this Bermuda Triangle file where I just throw everything in case I ever need it. Um, I mostly it's just sticking with the same hospital system and it all being electronic.
Yeah,
The only
totally.
saving grace. Um, but you know what I've found is that even if I go to someone new, they ask you every single detail from the beginning anyway. So you're just gonna like recite it. How was
Totally.
your pregnancy? It was great. It was six
I-
years ago. Can we talk about something else?
Oh my gosh, that is
Um,
so true. You can have your binder and your tabs, and
yeah,
they're still going to ask you everything.
totally. Even including IEP meetings. That's what I'm learning too. Like
Yeah,
half the time I don't even send back the IEP papers. They're gonna bug me until I send it back. It's fine.
right.
If I forget the first round, it's fine. Sorry, teachers.
Love it. I'm curious because Austin has some, physical limitations, speech limitations that other children are able to see, and you've got,
Yeah.
older kiddos in your family and
Mhm.
sweet Avery. How do they
Mhm.
handle kind of the stress or the journey that goes on with Austin?
Yeah. Um, you know, they are super protective. Um, outwardly, they still give him a really hard time at our house. Like
Mm-hmm.
they like, typical little brother. He's a pest, right?
Oh,
But
totally.
the older ones are super protective. Um, they're so much more aware than they ever would have been before, myself included. Like, we'll just go somewhere and be like, "Where's the ramp?" You don't even think
Yeah.
about that stuff until you have someone with wheels of any kind. Um, so they're super protective. I'm hoping that because of their ages, 12 and 14, I'm hoping that it translates into them being like kind people in general and like more understanding people. They're kind of turds right now because of their
Yeah.
age, but
Yeah.
but they are also like, I mean, so accommodating. Will help with anything. One of them, he's a middle, and I believe in a lot of the birth order stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
he's like always getting on to me about my parenting and stuff. I'm like, what? You're fine. He's like, he just like thinks I'm crazy. But then
Yeah.
Avery is, she definitely doesn't know any different. She's the little helper. Sometimes she'll say stuff not knowing that kind of can hurt feelings, but we always like pick it up and finesse it, you know. Like she'll say, I can walk. Austin can't walk. I'm like, yeah, but he has wheels. It's pretty cool, huh? You know, we have to just
Right.
redirect really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But she's a super helper. And I think one thing that's been really hard with her is potty training because Austin still wears a diaper. And I'm like,
Yeah.
big girls wear undies. And she's like, Austin doesn't wear undies. I'm like, shoot.
Dang it.
So,
You're
yeah,
too smart for me, kid.
yeah, I know. So I'm having to explain, well, it takes him longer to get to the bathroom, so blah, blah, blah. Anyway, that's been
Right.
one, you know, thing that, because he's definitely her big brother. Like she doesn't really think of him as limited.
Mm.
He's still big brother for her.
Yeah, I love that perspective that siblings truly don't know any different.
Yeah.
Especially when they're the younger sibling, right? So this is,
Mhm.
as a parent, you can kind of see, oh, their life is going to be different than mine was, or than maybe what I
Mhm.
expected it to be. But to them, it's exactly what it should be, and I love that.
Mhm. Totally. The older ones have moments of like they'll vocalize sadness about certain things.
Hmm.
Um, but it's hard to watch, but at the same time, you know, it's like life and it's good for them to like have a bigger picture and, you know, more empathy in general and things like that.
Oh, totally. Yeah, they're definitely going to learn things from Austin that they would have never learned before, which is pretty
Mhm.
amazing from a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Um, so talk about some of the hardest parts about being a mom with special needs. And you touched on some of the ones like, not having the wheelchair ramp. I
Mhm.
guess I'm kind of interested in, your third kid develops typically until 1 year old, and then your life just changes and you can't do anything about it. Talk to us
Yeah.
about that experience.
Yeah, it's an ever-present form of grief, I would say. Like at first I thought, you know, you go through the sadness, you go through the anger, and then you're done. Yeah, no, that's not really how grief works. So that's been something that I've learned a lot about is like the ebb and flow of like revisiting different parts of sadness and denial, even, and all the things. Most recently, I feel like I've come to some place of acceptance with his physical limitations. And then just recently, a few weeks ago, when we had the genetics appointment, she said, I feel like there's something else going on. And then his TK teacher is like preparing me for the IEP. She's like, I don't know what all he's retaining. And I'm like, crap, I do
Mm-hmm.
not want to go down this road again with cognitive. I've already dealt with the physical part of things, but you know, if I have to, I have to. I know I'm strong enough to do that now, but
Yeah.
it's a little daunting at the moment. And then the other thing I do know is that I've seen him progress, and it's just later than everyone else. So I'm
Mm.
trying not to get too frazzled about, you know, these report cards and TK and
Right.
him only recognizing 5 out of 26 letters. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, maybe he just needs another year and he'll be closer to, you know, level. Anyway, so that's something that I have to temper in myself is like the expectations and letting him do things in his own time. And I think it's like a fine balance. And I think other special needs parents experience this too, where you want them to be in like the inclusion situation in gen ed as much as possible. But are you pushing them to something that they can't really master? So, anyway, yeah,
Yeah.
it's I'm
It's
always
the
waffling with
balance.
that. Yeah.
Well, and
And
it's
then physical. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was just going to say physically, each age range just brings something new. Like he's in a manual chair in kindergarten or TK, and he has an aide that helps him get around. But we were just thinking recently, like if he were 5 years old and not in a chair, we wouldn't just grab him and hold him. like when we're crossing a street, right? We would
Mm.
tell him with our words, like, stop, look both ways, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. But because he has this parent handle on his chair, we'll just grab him and kind of be in control. And so we are reframing how we parent too. We want to give him as much independence as possible and not baby him, but I feel like we totally baby him.
Right.
So that's something that we're working on too.
Oh, totally. Well, and it's each child, whether they have any kind of limitation or not, it's like you're constantly reevaluating, like how is
Oh,
what I'm doing affecting them.
yes. Why
Hmm.
is it so hard? Why can't they
It
all be the
for
same?
real. Why can't there be one book that's like this is how to do it, people?
Totally. There's like every time you think you've got something down, something changes.
Oh yeah, that's a game.
Why? And also, why do I have teenagers and preschoolers? Like, that's a terrible situation.
Oh my gosh, you make me laugh. Okay, but you are so wise in your range, and I just love that. Like you have the perspective of both, that preschool moms don't have, and vice versa.
That's true. That is true.
Um,
I remember being very stressed when my younger ones, also because I was living in the South, no offense, but you know how parenting is a little more intense or can
uh,
be.
uh-huh.
And I remember with my little ones, like being at the grocery store, or my older ones now, being at the grocery store when they were like 3 years old and being like, you do not throw a fit in this store, all serious. And now I'm
Yes.
like, oh, well, whatever.
Oh,
Run around the
totally.
aisles. I don't care.
Exactly. The things you didn't let slide with your 3-year-old 10 years ago is very different than
Yeah.
probably what you do with Avery.
Plus, I have to say, you cannot yell at a kid in a wheelchair like in public. People think that you are like a demon. I'll be like, Austin, get back here. And every grandma within a 10-mile
Oh
radius is like
gosh.
giving me evil eyes.
Oh, has it just makes me curious. Has anyone ever said anything to you? Or, what are some
Um,
of those things that people say that you're just like, "Really? Did you that just come out of your mouth?"
oh my gosh, all the time. And I have a lot more patience now than I did even like 2 years ago, but especially little kids, they are so honest. They'll
Mm,
be like, why don't his legs work? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, we're not ready to talk about it. Go away.
yeah,
But I just say, "Oh, that's how God made him," my easy answer. But
right. Sure.
depends on who it is. A lot of people, grandmas and all kinds of people, they just want to talk to him and he's so cute and it makes sense. But also, like, I'm in a hurry, so move along.
Right.
But
Totally.
people like randomly buy him stuff. They'll, like, we were in line the other day and someone was like, "Oh, you want a sucker? Okay, I'll buy you a sucker." I'm
Oh
like,
my
guys,
gosh.
stop spoiling my child. But
That
also,
is
it made him feel special, so it's fine.
Oh my gosh. It's
Yeah.
funny. I had a couple interviews ago with Shay, and her daughter has some limb difference, and she was talking about how when kids come up to the playground and they
Hmm.
ask, what's wrong, and it just changes the mood for her daughter, and
Yeah.
it just annoys the crap out of her. So we're kind of in this trend of parenting of be inquisitive and ask questions, but there's also a time and place to do that. And at the playground is
Yeah.
not one of them. And I love that her response, she tells her kids to say, I don't think you would understand vascular malformation, so I'm not going to explain it to you. And I just love that. Like get super sciencey with
That is
them.
funny. Totally. I love it. And then what are they going to say? Just turn around. Just turn
Yeah.
around.
Okay, bye.
Yeah.
And I want to
Playgrounds
hear
are my nemesis.
oh, yes, for sure. And so you have a passion and you've developed this amazing nonprofit. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I just really hate playgrounds.
Mm,
And I do and I don't. I have a love-hate relationship with them. At first I hated them because I felt like, super sad every time we were there. I didn't want to look like an other. I didn't want to explain it to anyone, etc. And Austin looks, physically, it's very obvious. He is crawling at the playground. Now he's a little old for that. So I carry him everywhere. That's the second reason I hate playgrounds
mm,
because I don't want to crawl up to the top of the slide and go down with him every time. I
right.
do it because I'm a freaking amazing mom. I'm just kidding.
Yes, you are.
But but I don't want to. So we really don't go to playgrounds very often. But they love it when we go. And I usually try to get my big boys to go too because they fit on the playground a lot better than I do.
Yeah.
But every single time, you have to navigate our playgrounds. I don't know how yours are in general, but ours have mostly the bark situation. And they say you can roll wheels through it, but you can't. That's total, PR move on their part. But we got to push through and then take him out of his chair and carry him up and down. I don't know. It's just a beast. So in our area, we live in, total suburbs. And we don't even have like a city or a city council or anything. We have a community services district that handles all the community type places like playgrounds and parks and open spaces, whatever. So right when we moved here, like the summer we moved here, I asked for a meeting, and they are fortunately building some new playgrounds and parks. And not all communities are growing like that, but ours is. And so I feel kind of lucky that we are building multiple playgrounds from scratch. But that being said, this is not unique to my area. I think that a lot of areas build these playgrounds and they'll include like 2 or 3 elements that are considered inclusive and then call it an inclusive playground.
Right.
And by that, I mean like a sensory station or one ramp. Like,
right.
yeah, no, that's not it. So in looking around, it seems that all of these fully inclusive, all abilities playgrounds are typically sponsored by someone, Rotary, Chambers of Commerce, whatever, someone, because the cities or the community services districts need that little extra budget to make it happen because, like all special needs families know, everything's overpriced, like durable medical equipment, everything overpriced. But that's just true with inclusive playground features too. So we started a nonprofit because, one, I just had a lot of excess energy that needed to be expended somewhere. And I'm not good with like conflict or like teaching people a lesson kind of things. So if I could like have an entity and a reason to like be an advocate, that was easier for me. So we created an organization called Walk with Austin, my husband and I, and we are raising money for an inclusive playground in our town, which is perfect because it's going to be built over the next 3 years. They're starting like one phase at a time, like first the walking trail and then the baseball field or whatever. So that'll be perfect in terms of giving us enough time. Before we really started that, we helped our physical therapy clinic get a light gate trainer because they didn't have like modern equipment really. And I don't know. I mean, systemically, there's so many issues with like who gets what and whatever. Our area is pretty affluent, but we don't have a lot of services poured into it. So it's all like, community tax-based, whatever. So anyway, we supplemented and helped them get that machine, which is like $17,000. And then we've sponsored 4 adaptive trikes because that's been huge for Austin to have his own bike. Wow. And then we've raised $50,000 toward the playground, but we need like 200 more. So we've got a ways to go.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, it's been awesome. And like the grassrootsness of it all has been awesome. COVID sucked. It like sucked the life out of us for that long. But I'm super jazzed about what is to come because we have so many people that are like willing to help. We have somebody who's helping us get like a virtual walkathon set up for spring and then, or early summer. And then we got a local grant for an adaptive triathlon that we're going to do in September. So we have a lot of support and ideas, and I totally think it'll happen. It's been great. It's been great for me to have an outlet for, my newfound passion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I love that, and definitely make sure that you send me the information about the virtual walkathon, or what, whatever, triathlon, whatever comes up, so that we can share it with our community and keep everybody up to date. I want to ask a real question about, I find a lot of parents and professionals typically in healthcare who do have this kind of excess passion, i.e., this
Mm,
podcast for me is an example of that.
exactly.
That it's not a whole lot. Well, it's zero return on investment for me, but it's this is my calling, and this is absolutely my passion, and so. But as a special needs parent, you're juggling so much. But tell me about like the balance of also doing this nonprofit. How do you balance your week really with having to do it
Yeah.
all?
It took some, it's still, a daily process, but it took some time because I was kind of pouring into it a mental energy of like a full-time job, but I don't have that time or
Yeah.
the return on investment, right? So, we I also have to say that I am not good at like sharing responsibilities,
Yeah.
but I did recruit a board of like people that I trust and that I know will, help out of the goodness of their heart, not for anything in return, that kind of thing. So we had like a small board of 5 people, including my husband. And so the few events that we did in our first 2 years were just us 5. We did like we went to a half marathon and had a booth there and gave away stuff. And then we did several other little fundraisers and a auction and things like that. So that's all been very like attainable,
Yeah.
minimal like workload or whatever. But I know to make the next step happen, I have to relinquish some of the
Yeah.
the duties and stuff, especially because I would love like corporate sponsors and people like that in our community. You know that, you know, some company wants like Costco playground, whatever,
Totally.
somebody wants to
Totally.
sponsor this kind of thing. But it's all about like the connections and finding, and I'm just one person, so that's not always going to be me. So that's probably the biggest thing is like I feel so passionately about it that I want to hold on to every detail, but that's just not
Yeah.
realistic. So getting other people involved and letting them run with stuff is important.
Well, and it sounds like too, like just managing the expectations of this will take longer than you think it will,
Yes, absolutely.
mhm.
Well, especially during COVID, I was like, I feel like such a loser. I've done nothing for 6 months. But then everybody else was like, me either. It's fine.
Yeah, same.
So I've definitely learned to give myself grace on that because I had no energy, not only no energy because I was doing all these other things for my family and because the world was like in such chaos, but I didn't feel like I wanted to take up airspace because there was so
Right.
much going on with like racial relations and the
Totally.
election and COVID and everything. So I was just like, I'm fine to take a back seat right now. That's
Uh,
a-okay.
Absolutely. I felt the exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
So, my last and final question is probably the easiest and most difficult at the same time. And that's I would love to know what Austin has kind of taught you since he's come into your life and into your family.
That is the easiest and hardest. um, yeah, so much. Um, this is simple, and I don't even know if it's worthy, but I'll expand on it. To slow down. We don't always have to go so fast, and to be completely scheduled minute to minute and overproducing. Um, it's really taught me about like self worth and that we're all valuable just because, not because
Mm.
we can give this one thing or produce this thing. We're all just valuable in our own way. That was hard for me because I was like extrinsically motivated in life,
Oh,
like
yeah.
straight A student and, always needed like accolades and affirmation from outside. So I think that's taught me a lot about myself and about people in general, is like value who they are and not because of anything that they bring to the table necessarily.
Mm.
Um, and of course, just like the obvious is to realize that everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses and journeys. And I'm just so much more aware of other kids and adults and like families in general. I'll tell you an embarrassing story about parking in the wheelchair spot. Okay, I have a hard time saying the handicap spot, so I'm going to say the wheelchair spot.
Yep, you name it what you want it.
Exactly. Parking in the wheelchair spot at school, and I forgot to put my placard up. And this mom said she was walking by, taking her kid into school, and she was like, "Do you even have like a reason to be in that spot?" And I was like, "Yeah, I just dropped my kid off in a wheelchair. Like, what's your problem?"
Wow.
So anyway, me and another special needs mom sassing each other about a wheelchair spot. I was like, oh my gosh, this is my lowest moment, honestly.
Yeah.
So it was like, I don't know what I'm even trying to say, except for that there's a lot of emotion involved.
Yeah.
And so I have to check that a lot of times. And I started a support group for moms just recently, like 3 months ago. And they come over to my house on Tuesday nights, and we just sit around the fire pit and drink wine and talk, because it's a form of parenting that you can't always just divulge with other parents, and they don't understand. One of my friends said it's extreme parenting, and it totally is. Like,
yeah.
There's just so much that they don't understand about how much you're on all the time. Anyway, yeah, that's been another. It's actually a whole community, a whole life that I didn't know until Austin was here.
I love that. I don't know how you wouldn't, bite back at somebody who questioned why you parked in a spot. I mean,
I felt like such an ass, though.
Well, I mean, who wouldn't react in that way? It's like, yeah, I do have a reason. It's so crazy. Yeah. I love hearing these incredibly profound things that 5-year-olds are teaching, adults, and just changing life, changing the game for how you look at the world. That is so stinking powerful. And it comes from one kid, and he's so lucky to have you as his mom. And you're talking about the pressure and this extreme parenting. I love that way of looking at it. Like you talked about earlier, you are in charge of his whole medical history. Nobody, it is on you, and that's a lot to have on your shoulders. So, and I love that COVID is, getting somewhat contained with this vaccine and all of this. And so that you're able to be with people again and talk with moms around a fire pit, for God's sake. Like, that is so important.
It really is. I'm so glad that it doesn't feel quite as isolated as it has. I mean, it was isolated in general because of what was going on, but
right.
Sometimes I just really feel like, it's like a vicious cycle. Am I isolating myself, or am I not wanting to like project? Like, what is the deal? And then feeling guilty about, never going out. Anyway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes, it is. Well, we definitely want to hear about all of the things Walk with Austin, and please let us know how we can follow along with you guys on social media.
For sure. We are on Instagram and Facebook, and just Walk with Austin is the handle. So we'd love to have any and all people who want to support, or just have a community of other, people in the special needs realm.
Thank you so much, Holly, for being on the podcast today and sharing your story. We will definitely check out Walk with Austin. And I just love how you turned that playground situation and turned it into something pretty beautiful. So I really appreciate you being here. And listeners, thanks for being here. Make sure you share this episode so that others can learn more. Thank you for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, and you can follow us at Child Life On Call on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please rate and review to make it easier for other families to find us. We have cute merch available at www.bonfire.com/store/Child Life On Call, and you can listen to more episodes and find resources at childlifepodcast.com.